October 1859, that gave the announcement of his death, contained also a brightly written article from his pen on domestic music, evidently intended to be the first of a series. Otto Jahn, in the preface to his copious Life of Mozart, points out that it was a Frenchman, Fétis, and an Englishman, Holmes, who first reduced the known facts of Mozart's life to order and made them interesting to the general reader. Holmes's book, indeed, was the first adequate thing of its kind. The material for it existed in various scattered publications. Shortly after the death of the composer in 1791, there appeared the necrology of Schlichtergroll, that was followed by the memoirs of Niemetschek, Prague, 1798, Arnold, Erfurt, 1803, Bayle, Paris, 1814, stolen from Schlichtergroll and published under the pseudonym of Bombay, and Nissen, Leipzig, 1828. The last named book, by the Danish councillor who married Mozart's widow and settled in Salzburg, where he died in 1826, was, of course, richest of all in original matter, but unskilfully arranged and weak on the musical side, for Nissen was no musician. Holmes was the first to make a connected story out of all these reminiscences and letters, and to give the world a picture of Mozart in the round. Not content with mere documentary records, he sought out various people, the old Abbé Stadler, for instance, who had known Mozart personally, and he made a careful examination of the scores in the possession of André of Offenbach, who had purchased all Mozart's manuscripts from the widow for £500. Included among these was the thematic catalogue of his works that Mozart had made on his own account since 1784. Holmes's performance is doubly creditable when we remember the difficulties in the way of any foreign inquirer working, as it were, so far from his base. The best tribute to his work is that of Jahn himself, who speaks of it thus in the preface to his own much larger book. The task of compiling a compendious and readable biography of Mozart by a proper arrangement and redaction of the really interesting part of Nissen's material was performed by Edward Holmes, The Life of Mozart, including his correspondence, London, 1845. Here, the vital part of the correspondence is arranged and combined with a narrative based on the then accessible literature with such discernment and insight that there results a coherent whole, giving a trustworthy and, so far as was possible, a complete survey of Mozart's life. Holmes has, moreover, made good use of André's published catalogue of Mozart's compositions, and the information these contain as to the date of origin of the works. During a journey through Germany, he examined the original manuscripts in André's possession, and gleaned oral traditions here and there. He also made himself acquainted with musical literature, and produced a work that is without doubt the most reliable and serviceable biography that could be achieved by the skillful use of the material generally accessible. Jahn, of course, had special advantages in the way of research from the mere fact of his being resident in Germany, and his 1,700 pages necessarily add largely to our knowledge of Mozart's life. But a comparison of his work with that of Holmes shows that the difference is only a matter of expansion of detail, not of alteration of the essential lines and colours of the portrait. There is something valuable even in Holmes's temporal limitations. He wrote at a time when there was not a suspicion of the vast changes that were to come over music in the second half of the 19th century. When his book appeared, Beethoven had been dead only 18 years, and Wagner's Tannhäuser was only just being completed. Holmes, therefore, lets us see the old music as it must have appeared to the most cultured and liberal musical minds of the period just before the modern dawn. It must be remembered, too, that he was really doing pioneer work. For Mozart, as it appears from the note to page 73, was comparatively little known in England in the early part of the 19th century. Holmes's book was the first complete and adequate account of the composer to appear in English. There had been nothing before it but a translation of the very imperfect Schlichtergroll Bombay and a few scattered magazine articles. On few points does he need correcting, even in light of the assiduous research that has gone on since his day. He was doubtful as to the authenticity of the so-called 12th Mass, though inclined on the whole to accept it as Mozartian. Its spuriousness is now universally recognized. He was in error in thinking that the full score of the Requiem that was discovered in 1839, and is now in the Vienna Hofbibliothek, is in Mozart's handwriting. It is in part a successful imitation of Mozart's script by his pupil Süssmayr, who completed the Requiem from Mozart's indications. Süssmayer's share in the Lacrimosa, the Sanctus, the Benedictus, and the Agnus Dei of the Requiem is now generally admitted. To Holmes's account of the strange circumstances attending the composition of the Requiem, it needs only to be added that the mysterious stranger was one Leutgeb, steward to the eccentric Count Franz von Walsegg of Ruppach. The Count's wife had died, and he was anxious not only to have a requiem sung in her memory, but to get the honor of having composed it himself. He actually made a copy of the score, inscribed his own name on it as composer, and had it performed on the 14th of December, 1793. To the paragraph referring to the quartets Mozart wrote in 1773, and the influence of Haydn upon his style after their meeting in 1781. We may add that the 6 quartets of 1773 were apparently written after he had met with some of the quartets of Haydn. Holmes's conjecture that Mozart's letter to a certain baron must have been written in 1789 is correct so far as it goes. The date is settled by the fact that Mozart gives a similar account of the Hessler episode in a letter dated Dresden, 15th of April, 1789. It should be added, however, that Jahn and others do not admit the complete authenticity of the letter to the Baron von P, not the Baron V, as Holmes gives it, which was first published by Rochlitz in volume 17 of the Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung. Jahn gives the date of the birth of Mozart's sister, Maria Anna, as the 30th of July, 1751, not the 29th of August, as in Holmes. The oratorio referred to on page 30 was Die Schuldigkeit des ersten Gebotes. Only the first part was by Mozart, the second being by Michael Haydn, and the third by Adlgasser. In the passage on page 247, referring to Mozart's extra accompaniments to Every Valley, clarinets is apparently a slip of the pen. It should be flutes. Holmes's taste and judgment, too, are at fault, perhaps for the only time in the book, in his estimate of Gluck. But, after all, it is surprising how little that is really essential has to be added to or deducted from his work, which is still the best, as it is the most concise, English life of Mozart for the general reader. Ernest Newman.